My name is Margaret, and I'm 75 years old. I'm sitting here looking at some numbers that terrify me, not because they're mine, but because they belong to people I've loved for decades. 70% of Americans over 65 have less than $10,000 in retirement savings. The average woman my age has exhausted her nest egg by 81. And here's what breaks my heart. The people I know who are broke didn't fail because they were reckless. They failed because they were exactly like me, careful, disciplined, responsible. They saved. They waited. They believed the promise that if you just white-knuckle it for 40 years, the finish line will be comfortable. But nobody told them what to do after the finish line, and by then it was too late. I'm telling you this because I wish someone had grabbed me by the shoulders at 50 and said the words I'm about to share with you now. One simple habit separated me from the broke retirees I know. Just one. And if you're watching this, you need to know what it is. Not tomorrow, not next month, right now, while you still have time to change the ending of your own story. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to scare you into buying a course or a product. I'm here because I'm 75, and I've learned the hard way that the silence around retirement failure is itself a kind of failure. So I'm asking you for something simple. Stay with me. Really listen. Because the rest of what I'm about to tell you might save your life, or at least the life you thought you'd earned. I spent 40 years in the corporate machine, 40 years from age 25 to 65. I was the kind of employee who showed up before anyone else and stayed after the lights went out. I believed that sacrifice now meant paradise later. I skipped vacations to hit targets. I missed my daughter's school plays because the quarterly earnings were due. I ignored the ache in my shoulders and the tightness in my chest. Physical warnings that my body was keeping score even when my brain wasn't. Everyone told me I was doing it right. You're so disciplined, Margaret. Your retirement will be incredible. You're the gold standard of responsibility. I heard it so often that I started to believe it was true. I maxed out my 401k. I opened an IRA and fed it religiously. I watched the balance grow with a kind of reverent pride. Somewhere around age 45, I became less a person and more a portfolio. My identity fused with the number in that account. I wasn't Margaret anymore. I was Margaret who has saved $850,000 for retirement. And you know what I did with my life while I was building that number. I deferred everything. Just everything. The trip to Italy I promised myself I'd take. The morning walks with my best friend Linda. The quiet evenings reading novels instead of spreadsheets. The Saturday breakfasts with my daughter when she was still young enough to want them. I told myself it was temporary. After retirement, Margaret, after 65, you'll have all the time in the world. That was the lie I told myself every single day for 40 years. The pride was real, though, real and suffocating. At 65, I threw myself a retirement party, and people stood up and called me wise and disciplined and an inspiration. Inside, I was thinking, I don't feel wise, I feel empty. But I didn't say that. I smiled and accepted the congratulations, because admitting the emptiness would have meant admitting that maybe, just maybe, I'd made a terrible bargain. Then came the first year of retirement, and then the second. And I realized something that no financial advisor had ever mentioned, not a single one in all the meetings I'd attended. The problem wasn't whether I had enough money. On paper, mathematically, I did. The problem was that I had no idea how money actually moved through my life once the paycheck stopped coming. I was working in the system so long that I'd never tracked my actual spending. Not really. I knew the big things: mortgage, insurance, healthcare. But I didn't know the hundreds of small habits that drain a nest egg like a slow leak in a pipe. The coffee I bought every morning without thinking. The subscriptions I'd forgotten I had. The way I'd started spending money on experiences because, well, wasn't that what retirement was for? I had a number, my nest egg, but I had no map of how to navigate inside it. I watched my friends retire the same way I did, with the same pride, the same carefully accumulated nest eggs. And within a few years, something became clear. The ones who stayed comfortable weren't the ones with the biggest account balances. They were the ones who did something that sounds almost laughably simple. They paid attention. They looked at what came in and what went out every single month, and they adjusted. They weren't guessing. They weren't white-knuckling through their 60s, waiting for some imaginary moment when everything would be okay. The ones who got into trouble, and I watched this happen with actual people I loved, the ones who got into trouble were the ones who treated retirement like a long vacation. They looked at the big number in their account and they thought, okay, I'm safe now. They didn't think about the sequence of returns risk. They didn't understand that if the market crashes in your first year of retirement, you're in a different kind of danger than someone who's still working. They didn't track their monthly cash flow. They didn't adjust their withdrawals when things weren't working. They just spent and hoped and hoped. And then one day they looked at the account and it was half what they thought it was. That was the hidden danger that nobody warned me about. It's not the big catastrophe that gets you. It's the slow bleed. It's the not knowing. It's the assumption that the number you saved is static, that it'll sit there like a rock while you withdraw from it forever. But it's not a rock. It's a living thing. It moves every day. It grows in bull markets and it shrivels in bear markets. And if you're not paying attention, if you're not doing the one habit, then you're flying blind. I'm not proud of how long it took me to understand this. I didn't want to admit that my careful, disciplined approach to saving had a fatal blind spot. It took me years to say this out loud, but I built a financial house and I never learned how to actually live inside it. I was 71 when everything changed. I'd been retired for 6 years. I was having lunch with my closest friend, Linda, the one I'd sacrificed so many mornings with. She was telling me about a pain in her chest. It was probably nothing, she said, just stress. But I heard something in her voice that made me hold my breath. 2 weeks later, she had a massive heart attack. She died before her 72nd birthday. She'd saved $620,000 for her retirement. She spent about 3 years in it before she died. That number didn't matter anymore. All that discipline and deferral didn't matter. What mattered was that she never took the trip to Greece she'd been planning. She never got to write the memoir she was always talking about. She saved and saved and saved, and the universe didn't give her time to enjoy any of it. I sat with that for months. I was furious at her for leaving me. But I was also terrified of myself, because I was only 4 years behind her age-wise, and I realized that I had no guarantee I wasn't about to become exactly like her, except worse, because Linda had at least accumulated money. There were people I knew who were becoming like her and poor. That was when the math became visceral for me. That was when sitting down with my spreadsheets stopped being an abstract intellectual exercise and became a matter of actual survival. And that's when I understood what separated me from the broke retirees I knew. It wasn't willpower, it wasn't intelligence, it wasn't how much they'd saved. It was this: the retirees who stayed okay had built a monthly habit of paying attention. They opened their brokerage statements. They looked at their Social Security deposits. They listed every expense: medical, groceries, gifts, everything. They compared the money coming in to the money going out, and then they did something radical. They adjusted. If their withdrawal rate was pulling too much, they cut back. If the market was performing worse than expected, they adjusted their spending down until the numbers worked again. If they found they were spending less than they thought, they might take a modest trip, or help a grandchild, or donate something. But they did this every single month. They didn't ignore it. They didn't hope it would work out. They looked. I know how boring that sounds. I know how unromantic. You worked for 40 years to escape the rat race, and now I'm telling you, the habit that saves you is, what? Bookkeeping? Yes, actually, yes. Because here's the thing. The retirees who are broke looked at their big retirement number once a year maybe, and then looked away. They assumed the math would work out the way they'd planned it. They didn't account for inflation in their healthcare costs. They didn't notice when their investment returns underperformed. They didn't adjust until the crisis was already here. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the ones who are broke are now trying to go back to work in their 70s. They're working retail jobs or driving for delivery services because they didn't have this one habit. They're exhausted, they're embarrassed, and it's too late to build a nest egg now. I realized when I was 72 that my father had known this. He had this old leather-bound ledger, and I found it when I was clearing out my childhood home. In this ledger from the 1950s and 1960s, my father had written down every single expense. Every one. He wasn't wealthy. He was a factory supervisor, middle class in the most modest sense. But he had tracked his money like his life depended on it, because it did. And he retired comfortably, which was remarkable for someone in his position. I realized I'd rejected his example. I thought I was more sophisticated. I thought my 401k and my financial advisors made the old ledger book method obsolete. But the principle wasn't obsolete. It was eternal. Knowing where your money is going is the single most important piece of financial wisdom, whether you're making $30,000 a year or $300,000. So here's what I did. At 72, I started keeping my own version of my father's ledger. Not out of nostalgia, out of sheer necessity. I opened a simple spreadsheet. Though it could be paper, It could be a notebook, it could be anything. And I wrote down 3 things: my Social Security, my withdrawal from my IRA, my part-time pension from the company I'd left. Every single month, money in. Then I listed my expenses: healthcare premiums, my condo fees, groceries, gas, phone, internet, insurance, gifts, entertainment. Every category, as honest as I could be, money out. And then I subtracted one from the other. If the number was negative, I was spending more than I had coming in, and that was a crisis I had to solve. If it was positive, I could breathe. If it was positive and comfortable, I could maybe spend a bit more, or save, or give away. That one habit, and I mean this sincerely, that one habit changed my life. Not because it made me rich, my nest egg hadn't magically grown, but because it gave me back control. For the first time in my retirement, I wasn't walking around with a low-level anxiety that something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I knew. I looked at the numbers every month, and I knew exactly where I stood. And do you know what happened? I found that I was actually spending less than I feared. I had some subscriptions I never used. I was buying convenience foods because I was anxious about my time. When I started paying attention, I realized I could cut a few $100s a month and not lose a single thing that mattered. Suddenly, the spreadsheet wasn't an iron fist. It was a skeleton key. It opened up a little more breathing room. More importantly, when the market had a down year, and they do, because that's how markets work, I didn't panic. I didn't wake up at 3 in the morning wondering if I should have done something differently. I looked at my monthly cash flow, and I realized that even in a down year, I could adjust. Maybe I don't take the big trip that year. Maybe I tighten up for 6 months. But I'm not in a crisis. I'm not about to lose the roof over my head. That's the difference. That's the single habit that separates the okay retirees from the broke ones. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this because I wish someone had said it to me before I spent 4 decades building something without knowing how to live inside it. I'm saying this because I watched friends of mine, good people, honest people, hard-working people, end up with nothing because they never developed this one habit. What you're doing right now, if you're still saving and still working, is building the foundation. That's important. Don't misunderstand me. You need money to have options in retirement. But while you're building the foundation, I'm begging you, start building the habit too. Start paying attention to where your money goes now while you have income to adjust. Get comfortable with a monthly accounting of your life. Make it normal. Make it boring. Make it a part of your identity, the way it was for my father. And if you're already retired, if you're already in that vulnerable window, then today is the day to start. It's not too late. I started at 72, and it made a difference. It changed me from being someone who was afraid to being someone who was awake. And being awake is the most powerful thing you can be. I have maybe 15 good years left, maybe more, maybe less. I think about Linda all the time. I think about how she never got to Greece. And I think about the fact that I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm not going to defer my life anymore. But I'm also not going to be reckless because I'm paying attention. Every month I know where I stand, and that knowledge gives me permission to actually live. That's what I want for you. I want you to have enough money and the peace of mind that comes from knowing it. I want you to stop deferring, and I want you to understand that the two things are connected. You don't get the peace of mind without the attention, and you don't deserve the freedom unless you're willing to look, really look, at what your freedom costs.